think that's fair. If I ask you to do it, then I have to participate. I think is a fair
Yeah,
thing.
it was not.
Right, wonderful. I am not the best.
Hello,
dancer.
Green Apple Books on the Park. Welcome. Thanks for joining us this evening. We're about to get started. Thank you for joining us for our event live and in person or online out there. Hello, online people. Thank you for joining us here for our event with Charlie Jane Anders and Maggie Tokuda-Hall. Pick up on cues, I see. You've all done so well. I'm very proud of you. I'm Car. I'm the events coordinator here for Green Apple Books in San Francisco. I just wanted to tell you about a couple of announcements that we have for the store here before we get started. First things first, you might notice that I'm not wearing a mask. That is only temporary. But masks are required at all times during this event for our audience members. Our speakers are allowed to do what they want. We're just trying to minimize our risks so we can keep doing these things. So thanks for being cool about it. I won't tell you all of the details of all of the events that we have coming up, but I will tell you that they are very, very cool. And if you like events like these, you might like some of our other ones. You can check them out online at greenapplebooks.com/event. I will tell you just a little sneak peek. Upcoming, we have Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. I know, it's next weekend. We have Shriti Swami for her debut novel. I'm really excited to tell you now. I'll just keep it between us. It's not on our website yet, but virtually we're going to be hosting out live at Mistress of the Dark. I'm very excited. So keep an eye out for that on our website. And if you're not subscribed to our newsletter already, something free to find out the latest news of what's going on in Green Apple. I'm very excited. I don't know what I'm going to do. All of our events are free unless stated otherwise. So that being said, if you can, please do buy books. Please do buy books from us or another beloved independent bookstore and not like, I don't know, a billionaire with a cowboy hat. That would be preferable if you can. We also know that like it's not possible to buy a book for every single event that you go to, but this is something that means a lot to you. We would really appreciate it. When you buy books, it helps support us as an independent bookstore in the year 2021. It supports the authors that put so much work into making these books, and then you get a book out of it, which is very, very cool. So please do if you can. Let's see, afterward, we're also going to have a signing line. So if you're here joining us in person, is it fair to assume that you'd be willing to sign books after this? Yeah, we got to go ahead. They're going to do it, folks. So I will definitely show you where the signing line is post-event. I'm happy to do that. And thank you so much to everyone who ordered online, who was not able to join us in person. We have folks from all over the country joining us right now, and I'm so excited to see it. So thank you for pre-ordering, and we'll get you your signed and personalized copies very, very soon. So thanks for that. Without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce the authors that are joining us this evening. First up, Maggie Tokuda-Hall is the author of Also an Octopus, illustrated by Benny Davies, The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea, and Love in the Library, with more books forthcoming. She has a BA in studio art from Sturts College and an MFA in writing from the University of San Francisco. She lives in Oakland, California with her husband, son, and objectively perfect dog. And you can pre-order her book, Squad, here tonight and receive a sticker, which you really, really want. So if you're not entirely sold on the book yet, I'm sure one of us can convince you, but I think the stickers also do the work. So if you want to pre-order Squad, you are able to do that here. Please do welcome Maggie Tokuda-Hall. Say a little bit about Charlie. Yeah. All right, last but most certainly not least, Charlie Jane Anders is the author of Victory is Greater Than Death, the first book in a new young adult trilogy, along with the forthcoming short story collection, Even Greater Mistakes. Her other books include The City in the Middle of the Night and All the Birds in the Sky. Her fiction and journalism have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Slate, McSweeney's Mother Jones, the Boston Review, Tor.com, and many, many others. Her TED Talk, Go Ahead, Dream About the Future, got 700,000 views in its first week. And with Annalee Newitz, who you might know as well, She co-hosts the podcast Our Opinions Are Correct. Her book, Never Say You Can't Survive, is the reason we are here this evening. Please join me in welcoming Shirley Fernandez. Hi. So, let me know if you're having a hard time hearing us. I think I'm going to stay masked for now just because my mask matches my dress, and I feel like that's important.
It is important.
And Maggie's mask has Occupy on it, which is also extremely important. So, but if people cannot hear us either here or online, thank you so much for being here, both people, both visible and invisible. I appreciate all the invisible people who are here as well.
And thanks to Green Apple for having us here. It's so exciting to be back in a bookstore. I hope you all have touched every single book. Well, so for today, what we're going to do is like a bit of conversation between me and Charlie Jane. We'll do some question and answers with priority to people who are here in their human suits. And then we will sign books as you buy between 5,000 and 7,000 copies of every book from Green Apple.
We will sign anybody's books. I'll sign Emily's books, We'll sign William Gibson's books. I don't know.
I'll definitely sign William Gibson's books. Anyway, so Charlie, what I love to do when I do in conversations with people is start off with a lightning round. And this is to make you uncomfortable and make everyone else comfortable. So the idea is I'm going to give you binary options, this or that. And you have to name which one you want.
Smash the binary.
Smash the binary.
With zero explanation as to why. So, are you ready for the lightning round? Are you guys ready for the lightning round? Great. Okay. Fame or fam?
Fam, for sure. God.
Mrs. Frizzle or Mr. Rogers?
Oh, Mrs. Frizzle.
Cats or dogs?
Where's the cats?
Noodles or dumplings?
Oh no, that's impossible.
You
that's
have
too
to
hard.
choose.
Okay, dumplings.
Hamsters or hamburgers?
Well, you can't eat hamsters.
Can you?
I'm gonna say hamburgers.
Okay. Houseplants or sourdough starters?
House plants.
Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Trek.
Arsenic or grenades?
Arsenic, is that what you said?
Mhm.
I'm gonna say grenades. It's
Okay.
more festive.
Nothing says Merry Christmas like a grenade. One horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses?
One horse-sized duck, for sure.
Octopuses or robots?
Robots.
Hot girl summer or sad boy fall?
Hot girl summer, for sure, man.
Ray Bradbury's Ghost or Ursula Le Guin's journals?
I'm gonna say Ursula Le Guin journals.
I agree. Okay, well, that's the lightning round.
Yay!
Thank you all for participating. And by you all, I mean Charlie Jane. So we're here today to talk about Never Say You Can't Survive, which is Charlie Jane's really beautiful book of writing advice. And I was telling her before this event started that it is such a nice antidote to my own interior monologue, which is crushingly mean of writing advice. And I just wondered, how do you stay positive when you're doing something that's so solitary in a time that is so dark?
It's really hard. It's
Yeah.
very, very hard. And among the things that I talk about in the book that I also kind of obsess about in real life is, the more you can have community around you, the more you can make it a communal act rather than a solitary act, the better. The more you can kind of change your reward structure so that you're rewarding yourself for stuff that you actually can do rather than beating yourself up for stuff that you cannot do. Like that's better. I think whatever you can do to just reconnect with the fun of writing, like if it means cheating on your current project and just writing something goofy and silly that you just want to write for yourself, or anything that you can do to just make it fun again. Like I've been experimenting a lot with like ways to make it fun. Annalie has been giving me a little grief for saying this, but I'll get into bed with a glass of whiskey and a blank notebook and just scribble and drink in bed. And apparently you're not supposed to drink whiskey in bed. I didn't know this. Nobody told me, but apparently.
Is there like a law?
The whiskey police? I don't know. So I'll just drink whiskey in bed. And now I have a cat, so my cat also tries to drink whiskey in bed, which is the problem. But other than that, it's great.
That segues perfectly into a passage from the opening of Getting Started, and it says, write whatever you need to survive. And it said, whatever you feel able to write, whatever will make you feel like you can keep living and keep fighting. Your job is to survive and maybe to help others survive. That's it. That's more than plenty. And I wondered if you could tell us a little about your new YA book as well, which also came out this year and is brilliant and perfect and adorable, and how it kind of helped you feel like you could survive.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the YA book is something I've been working on since 2016-ish. 2016, and then I really kind of found the groove with it in 2017. But I feel like it has kind of, writing it did help me to survive what were some really tough years.
Yeah,
Like
2016 sucked.
2016 sucked, 2017 sucked, pretty much every year since then has kind of sucked. So I feel like working on that YA book really kind of helped me to because it's a book where the kind of overarching vibe is one that's like kind of joyful and optimistic, and there's some darkness for sure, but it is a book that is kind of like about friends coming together and being there for each other. And I feel like reminding myself of that was in a way kind of reminding myself to keep connected to that part of myself. So I think that was actually a really good thing for me to be doing during these dark years that we've been having. And yeah, I think that,
Yeah, I mean, what is it like revisiting that? So you started it in 2016, but then it came out in 2021, another cursed year for completely unique reasons.
Yay.
And what is it like revisiting that work, that you wrote to in some way comfort yourself back then, and another time when we kind of desperately need comfort?
I mean, it's been mostly really good because now I get to hear from other people who've read the book and who are, hopefully taking some comfort from it. And like, I definitely have heard from people who feel like it's been kind of a nice, friendly thing for them to be reading during this terrible time. But it's also, I mean, obviously I'm still working on the sequels now. So I'm still kind of in that world. I'm finishing up the second book, like final round of revisions on the second book, and working on the third book. And it's just, it's like something I talk about in Never Say You Can't Survive is that when you create fictional characters, you're kind of making imaginary friends for yourself. You're making imaginary friends that you can hang out with who will never leave you. They can't go anywhere. They're trapped in your brain. And, even if they try, I mean, there's probably like a version of like 6 characters in search of an author, or like 6 characters trying to get away from the author. Like, wow, this author sucks. Can we just go have a different author now, please? But anyway, but these imaginary friends cannot leave you. They're trapped in your brain, and they're your hostages. And so that's a dark way of putting it. But point is, I feel like getting to write these sequels and getting to promote the first book and doing readings from the first book and kind of talking about the first book has just, all of it has kind of brought me closer to these imaginary friends of mine who, the last couple of years, I've spent probably more time in the physical presence of my imaginary friends than most of my real friends. So it's been nice to have imaginary friends to hang out with.
And nice imaginary friends. And I can't overstate this enough. Victory is greater than death absolutely whips. So if you want to read about teenagers like flinging themselves across the galaxy and saving the day and just being there for each other, I highly recommend it. Okay. So one of the things that you said in the book that really resonated with me and was so like healthy of a reminder, most of this book was like a healthy reminder. Like it felt a lot like being accompanied by a cheerleader who's like, you're not trash. You have lots of ideas, keep going. But one of the things that you say is that ideas are so plentiful. And if you sort of accept that and you're more relaxed about trying them out, then moving on from one is not as big a deal. Like you don't have to like cling on to that one idea you had this one time, which I love as somebody who shelves ideas a lot. And I wondered if you could tell us, other people who are aspiring to be as successful as you, what are some ideas you've shelved?
Oh, wow. I mean, I have so many like quote unquote trunk stories, like so many trunk stories that either I finished them and they just never appeared anywhere, or I didn't finish them. And they're a little bit of a blur now, to be honest. And some of them, it's kind of embarrassing to like say what the ideas were, because now I think it's probably for the best that they didn't come to anything, but let me think.
They sound like exes when you talk about them that way.
I mean, that's not entirely inaccurate. Like, okay, I had a gravity heist story where like it's the future where like rich people can afford more gravity than poor people, and so poor people have all sorts. It's sort of a little bit like The Expanse, except it was kind of more surreal because it was on Earth, but like they figured out how to redistribute gravity. Like they were able to move gravitons around, and so rich people have higher gravity than poor people. And so this person goes and breaks into the gravity vault and steals a bunch of gravity. And that was not a great story. There was the and gosh, how can I no, I'm not gonna talk about that idea. Sorry. A lot of these were like stories that I was looking at 15, 20 years ago that I now think I would not write for very valid reasons. That I'm like, oof. But I don't know. There was a story that I wrote that I actually thought had a lot of promise called The Gender Bombers, which I don't think I've ever talked about before. So, and years later, a friend of mine wrote a novel just by accident that had kind of a similar premise. So apologies to if you're listening. I did it first, but I never published it. It was basically set in a world, or set in our world, but it turns out that the reason why humans have like two, or have biological sexes, sorry, the reason why we reproduce in that way with like, sexual reproduction is because some aliens hundreds of thousands of years ago thought that our planet might be troublesome, and so they seeded our DNA with something that like infected us with sexual reproduction as like a virus, so that we would never become advanced enough to challenge them.
That sounds like well, not quite, but the Ursula Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness, how it's like super weird to them that Earthlings like us are in camera all the time, which is like we're DTF all the time.
It is actually very weird. It's a weird thing when you think about it. And so that was a fun story. It was an interesting premise, but I don't know.
I imagine that like your vault just contains a ton of premises where it's like, imagine a world where.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is I always thought, oh, I'll come back to this premise someday. Oh, this is a cool idea. Maybe I'll come back to it someday. And I don't, because as I say in the book, I figured out that actually ideas are kind of dime a dozen, and that, I'll never have time to write all the cool ideas I'm thinking of now, let alone the ones I thought of 20 years ago. And like, you know what, just let it go. I'm like, but I do think that beginning writers, myself included, when I was a beginning writer, one of the failure modes is that you beat yourself up if you don't finish a story. Like you start it and then you're like, oh, I've got to finish this no matter what, because otherwise I'm not following through or whatever. It's like, no, the story just wasn't right. It wasn't the story you wanted to be writing. You wrote a few pages and then you kind of hit a wall, and maybe you'll come back to it, but maybe you won't. And there's no shame in it. You're just trying out ideas. It's all good.
Yeah. To that end, you also talk a lot about sort of like drafting and figuring out what's holding your story up, what's not hitting quite right. And one of the things that I loved was the idea that you chose the wrong protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very common problem, and it's, oftentimes you pick a protagonist who you think is like really exciting or has some unfinished business or whatever, but they're just, you get a little bit ways into the story with them, and you realize that they're actually kind of boring, and that they're not pulling their weight, and that, they're not one of the imaginary friends that you want to trap in your brain for months and possibly years and like hold hostage. They're a side character who might pop up a few times, but you're going to release them from their captivity inside your head. And I'm just going to go with that metaphor because it's just so wonderfully twisted and terrible. So yeah, I mean, for example, my first published novel, Choir Boy, when I first started trying to write it, the main character was this kid who I think was secretly gay, and he still ended up being a character in the book, but there was this other choir boy in the book who I kept noticing them like in the background of scenes, and they were kind of figuring out that they were trans, and a bunch of stuff was going on. It's a little more complicated than that, but basically it's like, oh, they're a much more interesting protagonist, and their relationship being a choir boy was more interesting, and they just ended up being somebody that was much more fun to follow for like however many 200 pages or 300 pages.
Yeah.
So that's definitely happens to me a lot.
Yeah, I mean, same. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about that was, and I'll keep it limited to like the canon, so dead authors only, so that we don't hurt anyone who is alive's feelings. But if you could nominate a character who's a side character in a canon novel to be the actual protagonist and tell a more interesting story,
wow,
who would you want to nominate?
Man, I'd have to think about that a little bit. I feel like a lot of older novels, a lot of canon novels, oftentimes the protagonist is kind of this is the sort of the kind of audience identification character who is kind of a little bit one-dimensional and boring and like is kind of representing who the audience is supposed to be. And often that is the cishet white dude in the
Yeah.
story. And there might be other characters. Okay, I've got one.
Okay.
I'm gonna make everybody mad.
Let's do
Hitchhiker's
it.
Guide to the Galaxy.
Ah,
Like, what if we got Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy from like Trillian's point of view?
I'm not against it.
You know, she's a much more interesting character than Arthur Dent. Like Arthur Dent, by design, is a very, very, very like ciphery character.
Yeah.
And I would love if fanfic authors are watching this, either here or invisibly. I would love if somebody wrote like a fanfic version of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy from Trillian's point. It's probably already been done 100 times, but I would love to read that. So tweet at me or send me links to where I can read that.
I guess I did just ask you what would your favorite fic be, huh?
Pretty much.
Just a real roundabout way to get to what fic do you want.
I'm not mad.
So in chapter 12, you talk about how holding on to your anger is actually like a really healthy and great thing for your writing process. And you do it through the guise of telling Yoda that he was wrong. He's like, anger is not the way. And Charlie Jane's like, maybe it is though, if you're a writer.
Yeah, shut up, Yoda.
And I wonder, could you tell us a little bit about what writing from anger looks like for you and how that kind of dovetails back in with the idea of like writing your imaginary friends, the people you want to be around, people who care about each other. So I feel like they seem like ideas that could be at odds, but you do a really good job of pushing them together.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I want to say is that when you write from a place of anger, it doesn't necessarily read as angry prose. Like you might be really, really angry about some stuff that's happened to you in your life or to people you love or to think about things that are happening in the world. And then through the alchemy of writing and especially revising, it might turn into something gentle or sweet or funny or cute or lovable. It's not necessarily there's nothing wrong with writing angry prose that's just like, I was angry, so I wrote some angry prose and like, I saw the best minds of my generation starving, hysterical, naked, and Safeway trying to buy some guavas. I don't know. Point is, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but you don't have to do that if you're writing from a place of anger. I feel like anger can turn into all kinds of other things, especially once you put it on the page. And I feel like when those imaginary friends that you're writing about, those fictional characters who live in your head, who you are kind of hanging out with all the time, they can be angry about stuff. They can be dealing with situations that are kind of similar to situations that have pissed you off in real life. They can also just be like doing their best to be nice to each other and support each other, but there's horrible things going on. Or like the thing that I kind of talk about a lot in that section is that anger usually turns into humor, usually turns into surrealism, but also usually turns into like tenderness because we're angry when we have something to protect or something that we care about. And so I feel like, those imaginary friends, you don't have to hurt your imaginary friends in ways that you don't want to just because you're angry. You can turn them into your kind of righteous champions or your kind of gentle, sweet friends in the middle of possibly infuriating circumstances.
That just made me think of a follow-up question, which is how do you feel about the writing advice, kill your darlings?
Wow, I have a really complicated, I actually wrote about this in my newsletter the other day. I have a very complicated relationship to that advice, the kill your darlings advice. I think that, it's not bad advice. I think it's just overused. It's over broadly applied, I think. Like, there are definitely times, and I've had this happen to me, where my favorite scene in a story or one of my favorite moments in a book was just dragging everything down, and it was just getting in the way. It was cluttering things up, or it was actually kind of pushing the story in a direction that it didn't want to go, like a direction that the story shouldn't go in. And I had this one story a few years ago, which I couldn't finish it, and I put it aside for a couple of years. And then I came back to it, and I was like, oh, if I cut this one scene, suddenly I know exactly where the story's going and how to end it. This scene was just kind of misdirecting me in a weird way. That said, oftentimes your darlings are the best part of the story, and they're bringing life to they're adding more life to the story. They're making the characters more sparkling and interesting and fun. And you should just freaking hang out with those darlings as much as you want, and don't I feel like people sometimes interpret kill your darlings to mean if you wrote something and you especially liked it or were proud of it, it's got to go. Like anything you're especially happy with in the story is chaff, which is just not true.
Yeah. Enjoying your own writing? Disgusting.
I mean, there's a lot of puritanism in writing advice sometimes. There's a lot of it is a sin. By the way, if the folks watching online can't hear us, please just let us know if they're saying that in the chat or whatever. Are they having a hard time?
Is this a little better for them?
Is this better?
Okay.
Okay, well, we'll try demasked for a little bit and we'll see how that goes.
I also wondered, because I love thinking about anger in media and books and everything. What have you read or watched or listened to recently that you felt like was clearly coming from a place of anger that lit your fire?
Well, I mean, I know that Good Omens came from a place of anger because Terry Pratchett said so, and he kind of was very vocal about saying that when he was alive. What else? I mean, I don't know. It's a really good question. I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of very political storytelling in television and other media recently that's very clearly obviously Lovecraft Country is clearly from a place of anger and but also, I mean, oh gosh, okay, the movie Plan B.
I haven't seen it.
Oh gosh, it's amazing. It's so beautiful and funny and sweet and charming and just infuriating at times. It's all about these teenagers who are trying to get the morning after pill, and this kind of obnoxious pharmacist is this is not really a spoiler because it's the start of the movie. This obnoxious pharmacist is well, in the state of North Dakota or whichever state it is, I'm legally allowed to not give you this pill if my religion forbids it. And so he won't give them the morning after pill, and they're struggling with am I going to have to be pregnant? Am I going to have to give birth? And I'm 16 or 17, and they go on a road trip, and it's super funny, and it's very it's like every awesome teen road trip comedy, but it's got this core of just rage that I was just hell yeah. And I love that. I love when there's a comedy that's genuinely sweet and funny, but you can just see that incandescent core at the center of it.
Yeah. It's rude to ask a question and then answer it yourself, but also if anyone's interested in a book recommendation, Hench by Natalie Z. Wolcotts is so good. It comes from clearly having watched and read a bunch of superhero comics and wondered at all the devastation that lies in the wake of all these superheroes. It is super funny. It's clearly really angry about toxic workplaces and the ways that capitalism affects who we who we make into heroes and who we decide don't matter. It's a delight. Anyway, sorry, this is not about me. Okay, so in your world building chapter, which I find so helpful because you're such a world building maestro, so I was really excited for this chapter. So I was yes, tell me your secrets, wizard. But you talk about specifically food as a way of understanding world building, the idea that a lot of the food that we have, Italians wouldn't have tomatoes and the British wouldn't have potatoes. Just rhymed. And sorry, I didn't make that up. That was the order they came in. And Spam is considered a luxury food in South Korea because US soldiers introduced this processed meat after World War II. Whenever you look at food, you'll see historical accidents that are weirder than anything fiction could devise. And I was so excited about that because writing about food specifically in fantasy is very stressful for me because of that. Because it's oh man, what would they have access to? And what does it mean that they have goats? I don't know.
What do the goats mean? Yeah. What do the goats mean, Maggie?
The goats are a metaphor.
What are the goats a metaphor for? Is it capitalism?
It's capitalism. It's always
you
capitalism.
heard it here first. The goats are capitalism.
But I wondered if you could tell us a little, because in Victory is Greater Than Death and in City in the Middle of the Night, food is there a lot. It's on the page and it's really exciting and different. And how could you just tell us how you did that is my point.
Okay, so in the City in the Middle of the Night, for those of you who haven't read it, I'm not going to give huge spoilers, but there's these two human cities on this alien planet that humans have colonized or I mean, I'm trying to say colonized anymore, but humans have settled on this other planets. And it is, the book does very much talk about settler colonialism, by the way. It's not something that I skirt around. But anyway, so there's these two human cities on this alien planet, and I worked really hard to give each of the cities different food items based on like what I thought that they would sustainably be able to produce. And so like one of the cities has like actual like very organized agriculture because everything is very organized, and they have like these giant like rotating farms that go around and around, and they have they farm animals as well. And so I was like, okay, so they have access to grains, they have access to all these other things, and so they're gonna have a lot of breads and cakes and pastries and this and that, and they've got leather from these animals, and they've got various other kinds of meat that they eat from these animals. And this other city doesn't have that stuff, but what they do have is they can forage in this swamp over here, and they also have all these other places where they grow stuff kind of very chaotically because it's a more chaotic city. And so I worked really hard on that, and actually really tried to make the food items available in each city very distinct. And some of the characters in the book are traders who carry food back and forth, and so they're like, I've got cat butter, which, you know, I never am not going to be amused by cat butter. Like somebody milks a cat. It's not actually a cat. It's an alien creature that like spits vomit, that vomits acid and has like 5 horns on its head and stuff. But they call it a cat because, you know, that's what they think cats are now. Anyway, so victory's greater than death. Honestly, I just wanted food items that were like fun, weird junk food. I was like, because I was like, what would I have wanted? What would my teenage self have wanted to read about? And like, usually when you go into space and like Star Trek or whatever, it's either like little colored cubes that are like, here's a cube that contains all our nutrition, or it's like boring, like, you know, just hamburgers or whatever, which I love hamburgers. We already established rather have hamburgers than hamsters. But
take that, hamsters.
I mean, my cat would like it if I had hamsters, but you know, because he could eat the hamsters, but they wouldn't like that. Anyway, so I really thought a lot about like fun, weird alien junk food. And obviously, like the most fun and weird alien junk food is the Sidonian egg burst, which keeps going from like the size of like a quarter to like the size of a hubcap over and over again. And like you try to eat it, it's changing size really quickly. And I thought that was a fun, weird alien junk food. But there's also in the second book, I think maybe I cut it out, there's like Shagar shells, which are like the shells of these creatures that like sweat a lot as they shed their shells. And so it makes them really salty and kind of like they're like Doritos. They're like naturally occurring Doritos. Or maybe Fritos. They're Fritos.
Yeah, Fritos taste sweatier to me. That seems like that.
So I was like, yeah, I just need like sweating shells from some creature that was not harmed in the making of these things. They just shed them.
I love that for just in the way that you were talking about the different ways you thought about creating food, and it lend themselves so easily to the tones of those two different novels. Like City in the Middle of the Night, it's much more practical and serious and sort of a reflection of the socioeconomic and geographic ways that these cities are laid out. And then the next one, you're like, what would be fun?
It is, you know, I mean, I like changing it up, you know, I like doing something different each time.
Yeah, I think that's great. One of the things you talk about toward the end is that you read for human connection, that seeing people have empathy for each other is one of the best ways to develop empathy for them. There's a reason why enemies to friends is such a huge trope. We all want to believe that people can learn to understand each other, and that a strong negative emotion can soften into something more nurturing. Plus, of course, sweetness is always sweeter when it replaces bitterness, which is so lovely and also very like Jewish Passover-y feeling for me. Like it gives me the Seder feels. Anyway, I wondered if you could tell us, and this is like slightly to the left of this, but how you feel about redemption arcs for villains, because that's what immediately I started thinking of when I was reading that.
Oh like, man,
because that can be such a dicey and complicated thing, and I would love to know your thoughts on it.
I mean, I feel like I haven't written a lot of villains myself. Like I feel like prior to the YA books, I hadn't really written characters who I considered capital V villains as much as just very seriously misguided people who are genuinely struggling to do the right thing, but you know, keep messing up for whatever reason, versus like a Darth Vader-y villain. I feel like at this point in the year of our, Satanic Majesty 2021, I am very sick of villain redemption arcs. I feel like, especially like if you commit like really horrible, unspeakable acts, and then it's like, well, but you feel you've apologized or whatever, and so now you can be part of the good guys, or we're gonna just, you don't even have to spend like a week in like space jail. You're just like all good.
Yeah.
Like I'm actually kind of very opposed to, people who have committed like genocide or mass murder, or like the classic example is Darth Vader, who, kind of has like one moment of being a nice person before he dies. And then it's like, oh, he's forgiven. He gets to hang out with Yoda and Obi-Wan by the fire. Oh yeah, he like murdered how many children and he killed how many people?
Yeah,
He
somewhere
helps-
everyone on Alderaan's like, hey.
I mean, seriously. And it's like, it's like there's this line. Okay, the movie Bedazzled, which is not the remake, but the original Bedazzled. Thank you very much. So the original Bedazzled from like 1968, it's like this weird satire about the devil. And y'all should watch it, especially if you like the show Lucifer, because I bet everybody involved with Lucifer has watched this movie. So Peter Cook is the devil. I promise this is going somewhere. And he's kind of talking about how hard it is to get souls for hell. And he's like, I hate it when people just repent on their deathbed. Like that just really pisses me off. Deathbed repentance is, we lose so many people that way because, of course, in Christian theology, if you repent on your deathbed, you do just go straight to heaven. And he's like, yeah, like Mussolini, like did all these terrible things throughout his life. And then he's dying, and 5 minutes before he dies, he's like, scusi, mille regretti. And he just goes up to heaven. And it's like, that's bullshit. Like Mussolini should be in hell. And like the devil's really pissed about this. And I'm on the devil's side with this one. I'm like, no, go to hell, Mussolini.
I think Mussolini is in hell.
I mean, we'll probably all find out soon enough.
Okay, lastly, and most importantly, you mentioned that you were a prize-winning dancer in high school. And you described, I'm sorry, I have to read this straight from the text so that you understand that this is canon. I was a dance champion in high school. No, really. I used to do this dance that involved moving my feet very quickly and just kind of scooting around. I did not move any part of my body from the ankles up, but my feet were unstoppable. My friends used to call this my space clearing dance. Maybe because people thought this dance was funny, or because I was clearly putting a lot of energy into it, I usually won a prize wherever they would have a dance contest at a high school dance. I think you know what I'm going to ask you now, Charlie Jane. Will you please show us the dance?
So I will show you the dance, but then you have to join in. You have to join me in the space clearing dance.
Yep.
Okay.
These were our pre-agreed terms.
Basically, how can I? It's been so long. I have to get back into like the frame of mind of my
Green Apple, I'm so
17-year-old
sorry.
self.
I'm going to take off my shoes. Otherwise, I will fall into your books.
Okay, so basically, I did not move any part of my body, like I said, and I would just kind of move my feet really like, I couldn't even do it anymore. I was kind of clog dancing. I was kind of like clog dancing. I would just feel like, I would do this, and I would move my feet around a lot, and I was just like kicking and dancing, but I would move very quickly, like it would be very hyperactive. Like I had so much energy when I was a teenager, you have no idea how much energy I had. It was
This is
insane.
kind of like how my son dances.
Well, hopefully by the time he's a teenager, it'll be a little better.
I don't know, man. I'm hoping he sticks to it.
So that was the space clearing dance, like it was just like kind of maybe. Maybe some of my high school classmates are watching that and they can like chime in and say whether that was an accurate representation.
Verify. We're gonna need everyone who went to high school with you to verify the accuracy of that dance. I think we have like just a couple minutes for a few questions. Does anyone have anything like burning that they in the meat space that they would like to ask? Or from the internet? But yeah.
What's the best way to get through writer's block?
So she asked, what's the best way to get through writer's block? So I'm just gonna say it again so people hear.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to confess, I don't really believe that writer's block is a thing. I think it's like, I mean, I feel like it was a thing that people talked a lot about back in like the 70s or 80s or whatever. And I don't hear about it as much anymore. Ooh, wow, winded. I used to just do that for hours, that space clearing dance. Hours. Like one time I did it all night. I feel like what we call writer's block is actually like a bunch of different things. And it's anything from, I'm feeling really depressed and can't work on this right now. Maybe I should work on something else that, will cheer me up. Or just go read a book or go for a walk or whatever. I mean, anything from that to, I don't really believe in this story anymore. And I feel like this story is kind of like, I'm forcing myself to work on it, but I don't believe in some aspect of it. Something about the premise is just actually not really what I wanted to be writing. And I just kind of went in a path that is bad. Sometimes it's just that you haven't figured out where the story goes next. And you have to kind of just sit down and game out, like, what do the characters know at this point in the story? What are they thinking? Where are they at emotionally? And what would they do next? Or what's the thing that I'm really trying to get to in the story? And how can I get there in a way that feels honest or real or believable? I mean, I actually wrote a thing for IO9 back in the day about like 10 ways to get past writer's block or whatever, which I think you could find if you Googled. But I think in general, and I talk about this in the book quite a bit, if you get stuck, which I think is really what it is if you get stuck, you might have to just stop and think about why you're struggling and what it is about the story that's, maybe not gelling or not kind of working the way you want it to. And often for me, it's a lot of gut checks and soul searching, but mostly gut checks about like, okay, maybe I just don't believe in what this story is doing right now.
That kind of comes back together with what you were saying earlier about ideas being a dime a dozen and trying to like force your way through an idea that isn't the right one at the right time may do more harm in that way than good, and like keep you from writing the story that you're actually ready to write right now and like is the right one, right?
I think so, yeah. And like, okay, we should get to the next question, but in The City in the Middle of the Night, there was a part where I was like, I don't know where Mouth story go next. I know where Mouth ends up, but I don't know how Mouth gets from this one city to going back and meeting up with Sophie later on. And I wrote like 20 different things that happened to Mouth before I found the right thing. And it was a lot of just like figuring out like what Mouth would actually be wanting to do and what she would actually be trying to do at that point. And like, just kind of just stopping and thinking about where she was at. And it really took me a long time. And I had to kind of take a break and come back to it. So I don't know.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm glad that was good. Thank
Just
you.
so people on the internet know, the question said that was very thankful, very helpful. Thank you. just so you know at home that it was really helpful. Anyway, does anyone else here have a question? Great. Well, just kidding. Right there.
Sort of the opposite question. How do you know when you're done? Because you can always keep editing and making it better, right?
Somebody has asked, how do you know when it is done?
I mean, that's a really good question. There's certainly never a point at which you can't stop tinkering or when you can't stop kind of poking at something. I mean, I feel like it is kind of a gut feeling to some extent of like, okay, I feel like the ending makes sense and everything leading up to the ending is now kind of making the ending work. So that's a thing. I feel like you show it to a bunch of your friends, you show it to your beta readers and your sensitivity readers and your boon companions, and they tell you if they think it's working or not, before you send it anywhere. But honestly, for me, usually I know I'm done when I just can't stand to look at it anymore. When I feel like I've done everything I know can think of to do with this. I knew what the problems were and I think I've solved them. I feel like I have done the thing that I set out to do more or less, like for some value of done, and I'm just sick of it. I can't look at this anymore. And then, you could just put it aside for a few months and then come back to it and work on it some more, but probably it just is you're done, you're just ready to share it with people, either maybe just your friends, but you're ready to, share it with somebody. Is that Milo? Hi.
What's your question?
How do you deal with having multiple stories at once, like multiple stories and multiple projects at once?
So the question was, how do you deal with multiple stories at once? If you're like, you got fingers in different pots, am I understanding that correctly? Like you're working on this story about alligators and that story about the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah, I mean, I love to multitask, and I think multitasking is actually kind of challenging at times because for me personally, if I don't work on a story for like a few days or maybe a week, it starts to kind of fade a little bit. And if I came back to it, I have to go back and kind of reread and immerse myself in the story, which is not that hard, but it's a thing you have to do. But I feel like I've done different things to try to multitask. Like sometimes I'll be like, this isn't for a while there, I was like, okay, I'll work on the young adult fiction in the morning and early afternoon, and then like the mid to late afternoon, I'll change gears and work on the adult fiction. And it'll just, maybe like for a while I was working at home on the young adult fiction and sitting in cafes and working on the adult fiction. And now it's more like young adult fiction is at my computer, adult fiction is in bed with whiskey, and and my cat and the cat trying to drink the whiskey. But anyway, I feel like that's part of it, is just trying to have a demarcation, but also just, sometimes I'll just have a bunch of docs open and I'll just be like, well, I am kind of bored with this one or can't see where to go with this one. So maybe I'll just change gears and try a different one and go back and forth. I think there's nothing wrong with just kind of flitting from project to project, as long as you're, not just losing the thread of any of them, like as long as you're staying engaged to some extent. But yeah, I mean, multitasking is genuinely hard. It's genuinely challenging. And I feel like for me, it often does involve a little bit of like finding different settings or different like modes to write one thing or another thing. Like typing versus longhand also.
Oh God, longhand. On that chilling note, you can purchase Never Say You Can't Survive here at Green Apple Books. It's available as mentioned, the young adult novel, which absolutely whips ass. Victory is Greater Than Death. Has a great sparkly purple cover, and you should read it and buy it.
And The Mermaid, the Witch in the Sea, which like whips all the ass in the universe. It is so amazing. You should definitely, if you haven't read it yet, you got to get it. It's so amazing.
And sorry, one completely selfish plug. You can pre-order my graphic novel Squad from here. Speaking of talking about writing from a place of anger, it's basically my raised middle finger to Piedmont across the bay, which is where I grew up. And it's about teenage girls who turn into werewolves and eat sex pests at parties. Here at Green Apple Books, you can get today a sticker sheet that has like wolves and also a little banner that says "Eat the Patriarchy," which you can slap on whatever dude you like the least. With my blessing.
Yay. Thank you so much for coming. Please support Green Apple. Please support Green Apple. They're such an amazing bookstore, and we love them. And please just throw all your money at them.
They do have a lot of books in this bookstore, and I recommend that you buy all of them.
All of them.
All of them.
All of them.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
How are you gonna sign?
Yeah. You were amazing. You were